Hey guys, it's Matthew Zachary, and I want to tell you about the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, or the NCCN. The NCCN creates the treatment guidelines for doctors that help cancer patients lead better lives. But I want you to know that the NCCN also has guidelines for you. The patient guidelines were funded by the NCCN Foundation and were created just for people with cancer and their caregivers. They're free, they're easy to understand, and they're available right now for you, the patient and the caregiver. So go check them out at nccn.org/empower. That's nccn.org/empower.
My favorite thing about working in healthcare is the people. This industry brings together brilliant, highly motivated individuals who are driven by the opportunity to make a difference. My name is Hallie Tecco, and this is The Heart of Healthcare, a podcast where I'll be introducing you to the people on the ground moving the needle in public health and medicine.
My name is LaShyra Nolen, but my friends call me Lash. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and today I want to thank my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, for ordering my steps and allowing me to be here today, and for the beautiful people that they have surrounded me with in order to inspire this journey. I want to thank all my mentors at Loyola Marymount University and my friends who are watching right now. Hey, y'all. I also want to thank my Auntie Africa, who is here today, who quite literally is the reason why I decided to come to Harvard Medical School. I want to thank my little brother, who showed me how to do the Orange Ranger and keeps me on all of the Fortnite dances. And I especially want to dedicate this day to my mother, Ty Harps, who raised me as a single mother in Compton, California, and had me at the age of 18 years old. Technically speaking, I'm not supposed to be here. Statistically speaking, this is a miracle. And Mommy, you so silently are the architect behind all of my dreams and the dreams of so many in our family. And I just want you to know that you were the first superhero that I ever came to know. And I want you to know that I have this privilege of putting on this white coat and feeling like a superhero every day because of you. So I want you to know that this is your white coat, and I thank you for giving me the privilege to even wear it. And lastly, to all the little black girls out there, you can't be what you can't see, but I hope you see me now, and I hope you see yourself in me. We have to keep pushing, and you need to be here because medicine will not progress without us. The marathon continues. Thank you.
Today on the show, I'm talking to someone who represents the future of healthcare. LaShyra Nolen, known as Lash, is a Fulbright scholar and student at Harvard Medical School, where she serves as the first Black woman class president. As the founder of We Got Us, she is helping empower Black community members with accurate science information and public health resources. She is also a vocal activist, having built a platform and social following through her speaking and writing about healthcare inequality. Lash was born and raised in Compton, California, to a single mother. She told Teen Vogue, "Compton made me scrappy. I'm hungry for opportunity. I'm hungry for justice. I'm hungry to see my people win. So when you put someone like me at a place like HMS, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that vision a reality." Lash, it's so great to speak with you today.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us about life as a medical student. Is it what you expected?
Yeah, I think life as a medical student is a mix of a little bit of everything. I think during medical school, I've been able to maintain all the things that kept me driven and committed to my community as an undergraduate student and growing up. And I think that that's the thing that I didn't expect. I felt like in med school, I just wouldn't have time for anything. I've been very pleasantly surprised by how I've been able to maintain friendships and relationships and passions during my time in medical school. So I think that that's something that really was a pleasant surprise coming into my first and second years of medical school.
That's great.
Yeah.
I don't know if every medical student would say that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I 100% can imagine most folks saying no, it's a struggle, and
Yeah.
it definitely is a grind. But I think that it's one of those things where you just prepare yourself for the worst, and you get here and you're like, oh, okay, if I just maneuver some things around, maybe I can make it through.
Yeah. Well, on a kind of somber note, the Mayo Clinic and Stanford study found that US medical students are 2 to 5 times more likely to have clinically significant depression than similarly aged peers. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and why there's such a culture of self-sacrifice over self-care for medical students and residents.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think it's a part of the culture of medicine. It's something that I actually was just reflecting on with my partner, and we were just talking about how even during the pandemic, we saw so many health professionals really just be disregarded and how they weren't given PPE, but they were praised as essential workers, but really weren't getting the support that they needed at the start of the pandemic, and just generally how there's this culture where the harder you work, the less you see your family, the more you sacrifice, the more you're lauded. And how it's almost a badge of honor to say, I've worked over the weekends and I haven't seen my
Mhm.
family in however many days. And that's really just a part of the culture.
It sounds like Wall Street.
Yeah, literally, right?
Yeah.
The Wall Street of medicine. And I think that that very much so starts as a part of our pre-med culture as well. You have folks who are spending all-nighters trying to get A's in organic chemistry and these courses that they need in order to get into medical school. And it just goes on from there because I think in medicine, it's built in a way where it's very hierarchical. So you're always trying to get to the next step. First is getting into medical school, then it's getting into residency, then it's getting into fellowship, then it's becoming that attending, and then it's becoming, that the next step in your professorship, depending if you want to do academic medicine, of course. But I think that when you have this stepwise process, it makes you kind of forget about the fact that there's life outside of that. And I think that that's why it's been so important to me to maintain friendships and relationships outside of medicine so that I remember that the aspects of what we go through isn't necessarily normal. And to just remind me that there is life outside of that. And it's funny because my grandma, I'm a first generation medical student, and my grandma's like, wait, so you're not getting paid to work right now? And I'm like, no, I'm paying them to work right now. So it's
Oh
just
my
really
goodness.
interesting to talk to family and friends about our training. But
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of it, and in each step you're kind of taught to sacrifice your health and wellness as a means to continue to progress career wise. And I think that it's incentivized in that way.
Do you think that's changing?
I think it's changing in the fact that now if you're not talking about wellness, then your residency program isn't as attractive to folk. I think that that's a huge part of the recruitment process. Like, what
Ah,
is your wellness process for residents or in your program? How do you value that? But I do fear that a lot of it is superficial in the fact that, yes, we have these sessions for reflection for our residents, our trainees, or even as medical students. Yes, like, we have the club for wellness, but we're still going to push students to answer a patient's message on a holiday in order to, because that's how you provide the best level of care is when
mm,
you're always there for your patient. I think that sometimes when we have these wellness conversations or spaces, sometimes what people really want are like, good healthy snacks in the resident room all the time and
mhm.
a day off. Like they rather have that hour off to just reflect and take a nap or call family or do something else. And I think that sometimes we're so focused on filling that wellness space with something to say we're doing something that we don't realize that we're just adding more requirements onto people's plates.
Yeah. Well, as a patient, I'd much rather have someone looking after me who's
Yeah,
well rested and
right.
feeling good. I don't want someone who's at the end of a 24-hour shift and just, not feeling great.
Right, exactly. Give them their snacks, give them their
Yeah.
naps, you know?
Yeah. So, in your New England Journal of Medicine article, which congrats, by the way,
Thank you.
you shared stories about incidents in your medical education, like the CPR training or learning how to diagnose Lyme disease, where the curriculum just completely missed the mark. Can you tell us about these cases?
Yeah, absolutely. So that piece was actually the first piece that I've ever written to be published anywhere. And it really came out of this natural desire to share this experience that I had during my first year of medical school. And at this point, I was maybe 3 months into school, and we were in microbiology class learning about Borrelia burgdorferi, the spirochete that causes Lyme disease. And we were learning about the ways that Lyme disease progresses and how in stage 1 of Lyme disease, patients can present with a rash called erythema migrans, or more traditionally known as the bullseye rash. And the professor had an image of erythema migrans on the screen, and it was on a patient with white skin. And my classmate, who is a Black man, raised his hand and said, "Hey, how would I recognize that rash in a patient that had skin tone similar to mine, or a family member who had the same situation?" And the professor really didn't know how to give him an adequate answer. He just said, "Well, it appears a little bit more purple on darker skin, but honestly, it's hard to see, and you can't really use this as your sole piece of information for diagnosis, anyways," and just kind of kept on going with the conversation. So I was like, that's a really interesting point that it brings up, because I was also curious about the same thing. So I went on my phone and just Googled bullseye rash. And literally, I was just looking through pages and pages on the images section of Google Images, and literally could not find an image of how this presented on darker skin. And even though I knew that not every patient presents with the bullseye rash, I was concerned because I felt that this was representative of how we're taught to recognize key clinical findings as physicians in training only on white skin, and how that in itself was a reflection of racism and white supremacy. If we're learning to only recognize disease in one group, and
Hmm.
we're completely just leaving out this other group that's been traditionally marginalized in our society. So I decided to write this piece, and in, telling the story that I just told you about, I learned that there was a study that showed that Black patients tend to receive later diagnosis of Lyme disease. And the authors believe that it was partly because the erythema migrans rash is not typically seen or recognized at its earlier stages. And that has serious implications, because we know that Lyme disease can lead to issues with the heart. We know it can lead to Bell's palsy and affect the neurological system. And it has this sequelae that can be very disturbing. And I think that the fact that we're not learning to catch that, partly because of how we're being taught, it shows us that there's a systemic issue in how we're being taught medicine, and it has serious implications for the types of physicians that we're graduating. And I think the other case that I bring up is how women are less likely to receive bystander intervention for CPR. And the reason why I brought that example up is because when we were learning how to do CPR, something that all medical students have to learn, we were only learning on male-bodied mannequins. So that means that, patients with breasts were not as comfortable with learning to maneuver around that extra tissue that the patient has, or having that conversation about consent after doing CPR or before, or what does that even look like? And I think that those are the discomforts that are leading to this disproportionate number of women who aren't receiving that care that they need. So I think that once again, it just brought up systemic issues in medical training that really needs to be addressed if we're going to be able to graduate and provide the best level of care for all patients.
And did you bring this up with the administration or your professors?
I did, especially with the Lyme disease piece. I mean, something about me is like I'm someone who's gonna call out the system, but I'm always gonna tell you that I'm gonna call you out, right? So I'm not gonna, publish like a tell all,
Yeah.
and you're not going to know that I'm telling it all. I'm going to give you the chance to do better. And then together we're going to work to address the issue. So I actually approached that professor and I said, hey, I got to say, the way that we handled this situation in class yesterday didn't really feel completely resolved. And I had a conversation with that professor, and he said, I completely agree. And I support you in writing this up because I do think that it's a systemic issue. And the next day he came to class and we really had like a 5-minute conversation about disparities and how he felt like the way that the situation was handled wasn't adequate. And it was really fruitful. But I think the issue is that it was only a 5-minute conversation that was had because a student of the marginalized group raised his hand and said, hey, how would I support my community with the information and the education I'm being given here? And I think that it brings up a lot of issues. Number one, these conversations can't just be a 5-minute add-on. And two, it can't be the marginalized group that is advocating for themselves in these spaces. It needs to be a we that's saying, hey, why aren't we learning how to recognize this in all patients?
Yeah.
Because those are going to be my patients.
Yeah. Yeah. Like let's self-reflect and
Right.
correct from decades of systemic racism in medical education and care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
And on that note, research does show that diversifying the physician workforce can help reduce health disparities. Yet the percentage of students from these groups in medicine is increasing at a really paltry rate. And I actually read that it has decreased for Black men since 1978.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen to reach parity for Black and Hispanic doctors in the US?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I
Big
think,
question, but
yeah,
yeah.
no, it's a big question. But I'm so glad you asked it. I mean, I think the first thing that needs to happen is we need to look way down the pipeline. And I'm talking just looking at our education system and reflecting on the way it's set up and thinking about who has access to quality education in STEM. And for example, there are students who don't even have the resources that they need for their chemistry classes, who clearly don't have the same advanced placement accessibility within their courses. And all of those things are a reflection of systemic racism and the way that redlining impacts the way that taxes are paid and which schools get a certain amount of support. And when we think about the public school system versus the private school system and the charter schools, I mean, it's all really wrapped up in all of those things. But I think that just being a medical student and getting to this stage as a first generation student from Compton, California, I was raised in one of those communities where we didn't have a lot of resources, but I was blessed to go to magnet and gifted public school programs where a lot of resources were poured into me. But when we consider the path that it takes to get to medical school, this profession is really one of the wealthy. I mean, when you look at who is largely represented in medical school classes, there's been studies by the AAMC and reports by them that have shown that a lot of these folks are among the most wealthy of our society. And in order to, for example, if you think about just applying to medical school, first you have to become a pre-medical student at a university. So if you're first gen, you're not coming into the situation with much generational wealth. You have to go and spend this money, if you don't get that scholarship to get your undergraduate education. And a lot of these students are also doing work study. A lot of them are working while they're in
Yeah.
school. So it's this added pressure because you have to do the volunteering, doing the clubs, and also excelling your courses while also funding your education. And then after that, it's time to take the MCAT. And you then have to fork out this money for an MCAT prep course. And you're talking in the thousands,
Wow. Wow.
right? So you're thinking, okay, like it's a really be competitive. You then have to think about applying for these courses, or if you don't do that, then buying the books, and then thinking about the time that it takes to study for the MCAT. So you're coming out, and this is if you decide to take a gap year or whatever the case is. I took 2 gap years. So you have folks who are taking time to study for the MCAT, but they also have to work. They also have to in order to study for the MCAT, there's a level of privilege that you have to put that time aside to really put into studying.
Yeah.
And then you have to pay for the MCAT, right? Which can, cost you another $300-$400. And then after you take the MCAT, then you have to apply to medical school, which for each school can run you over $100. And then once you get into those schools, you have to go and you have to interview. You have to buy a suit. You have to buy shoes. And this is all to make sure that you maintain this level of quote unquote professionalism when you go for these experiences. And then once you get into medical school, I thought the costs were done once I finally got into medical school, right? But
You're
but
wrong.
I was totally wrong. I was like, this is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
You get to medical school, and even at Harvard, we're all using the same resources, right? Like we're all using, Sketchy Micro to help us with microbiology. We're all using UWorld for question banks to help us study for our shelf exams. And then we're also using Amboss. I mean, there's all of these hidden costs, Pathoma, these are all words that I didn't know anything about, but there are these extra resources that's kind of expected for students to buy as a way to help them succeed on these standardized tests that we take. And then you have to pay for the tests. So
Yeah.
it's extremely expensive. And I think that even if you think about clinical rotations, a lot of folks will say, yeah, like my site was, 45 minutes or an hour away from school. So you're thinking about Ubers, you're thinking about cars. Who has access to those things? And there's just a lot of hidden fees and costs associated with a career in medicine. And it's a forever thing. It's something that goes on. And there's this assumption that, oh, well, you're going to be fine because you're going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
But you have to think about who's coming in with intergenerational wealth. And if you think about the history of slavery, the genocide of indigenous peoples, you think about the struggles that our Latinx community has in our country, there are going to be marginalized people who are fixing the wrongdoings of our society by making sure that their family stays afloat, or they're not going to be able to have access to extra income after they become a physician to just simply pay off their loans as other communities have.
Yeah. And how many years does it take you to pay off that debt? A decade at
Right.
least. So you're putting
Exactly.
off, yeah, I mean,
Right.
in choosing careers, if you're going to be putting off income for 10 years versus graduating college and, doing another profession that you can earn income immediately if you're supporting family members, that trade-off, I can't imagine being faced with that.
Yeah, 100%.
So you wrote another article. I love reading what you write because it's so insightful. So your article for the Boston Globe was titled, "Why Doesn't Medical School Prioritize Social Justice?"
Yeah.
So on this note, so not just ensuring that students have an equitable chance of getting in, but an equitable chance of succeeding in medical school. Tell us all about how medical schools don't prioritize social justice and why.
Yeah. So that piece was one that I wrote after having a conversation with a mentor. And as amazing mentors do, they help you get your CV together. And we were going through the process of getting your CV prepared for in the format of someone who's interested in academic medicine, right? So there's like a specific format for CVs for different careers. And I was like, okay, I was learning the ropes for academic medicine. And we were going through the various sections. You have your publications, you have your speeches and things that you give and lectures. And we kind of just brushed through the community service section. They were just like, okay, well, this section really isn't as important, unfortunately. So let's like keep on moving down to the publication section. So here, and we kind of went into this deep conversation about the various sections that mattered and how you really need to beef up those sections. And I was like, it's just so interesting to me that we're brushing over this community service piece because I believe that's the reason why I even got into medicine in the first place. And I started to reflect on the process of getting tenure in academic medicine. And I started to reflect on the types of research projects that are funded by the NIH. And the answer to those reflections was overwhelmingly that our system does not incentivize people who are dedicated to social justice. And I think the examples that I thought of when it came to getting tenure is that really what is valued is your output. How much are you producing in regards to your research? But it doesn't, that type of system doesn't really give much to the community because, for example, if I'm a disparities researcher and I realize that having conversations about hypertension or doing hypertension screening in Black barbershops is what leads to improved outcomes, I'm not incentivized in this system to then apply for a grant to apply those findings that I found in my research to the community and to spend that time really in community building out this blood pressure and prevention program in Black barbershops because I already have to be thinking about, okay, what's the next thing that I'm going to write about? What's the next disparity that I'm going to elucidate? And I think that it really puts a lot of pressure on community-based researchers because in this system, it's really like quantity over quality. And in a system that just incentivizes output, this publish or perish mentality, who really benefits and who really suffers, right? Because, I wrote this piece in the New England Journal of Medicine, which I hope will have some level of impact on medicine by who will read it. But my community members, my family, my grandma, they don't have access to NEJM. So when we publish these pieces, it's like, who is reading them and who are they for? Is it really for us to serve ourselves and moving forward in our careers? Or is it so that we can create that research, which is important and imperative, but how do we translate it to community work without it negatively impacting our ability to move forward as professors, as scholars, in a way that is meaningful for ourselves and our students? And I think the second example that I brought up is how you have a lot of Black professors at academic medicine institutions who are really doing a lot to mentor marginalized folks at these institutions. So, for example, when I think about Harvard Medical School, we have, we tout that we have so many faculty, like over 10,000 faculty, right? But of those 10,000 faculty, how many of them are Black women? And that's going to be a mentor that I'm really going to need in my circle because they're going to help me navigate this space, especially as a first-gen medical student. But then
they're not paid for that, are they?
They're not paid for that. Exactly, right? And there's only so many of them. So they have this publish or perish mentality that they have to learn to conquer, right? Yep. But then they also have to mentor me. And they're also going to serve on your anti-racism task force that you've requested for them to be on with no extra pay, with no extra way to compensate them for the time that they're spending. It's like, okay, if you're going to ask your URM faculty to mentor all your URM students to serve on your committees, and you're not going to incentivize their research, but then when it comes to promotion, you're going to say, oh, I'm sorry, your output isn't enough. It's really just a system of gaslighting.
We'll be right back after the break.
The COVID-19 pandemic showed us how a microscopic virus could upend our lives and how unprepared our society was for it. There's so much more out there that we need to understand, which is why I recommend subscribing to Crooked Media's America Dissected, hosted by former Detroit Health Commissioner Dr. Abdul El Sayed. Each week, Dr. El Sayed sits down with doctors, scientists, culture makers, and policy leaders to ask questions like, how could new genetic discoveries change our relationship with our own genes? How could addiction to social media change our brains? or how even climate change could make the next major pandemic more likely. To hear discussions on these topics and more, check out America Dissected from Crooked Media. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
So kind of changing gears, in terms of you being in medical school and kind of getting to know your peers, do you think that your generation of doctors are going to approach medicine differently and change the system?
I have so much hope for this next generation of physicians.
Awesome. That's great to hear.
Yes, I really do. I really do. I think that what's exciting is that it's not just in medicine. Like when I think about friends and colleagues that I have in divinity school, in public health school, in law school, in business school, there are folks who are really thinking about how do we make a more equitable system. And I think that the generation of like millennials, or I think they're I get confused with all of these different names that they give the groups, but I think that the generation that's younger than me, they're even more social justice minded. And I feel like
Gen Z, right?
Gen Z, there we go. Yes.
I'm an old millennial. You're probably a young millennial, and then
That,
they're Gen
yep.
Z. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. I feel like there's so many different parameters. I'm like,
Yeah.
someone could write a dissertation on this,
Yeah.
But yeah, I really am inspired. And I think that the reason why I think I'm feeling hopeful is that I see my peers educating the old guard. So
Yeah.
when they're on their rotations, they're like, look, every patient that I speak to, I'm going to introduce myself with my pronouns. And I don't know if that's what you do, but that's what I'm going to do. I don't care what age the patient is, how they look.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do. And I think that by being unforgivably dedicated to social justice,
Yeah.
that is the way that this generation of future physicians is really going to change the game. But I think that change can go only as far as the system is willing to be malleable.
Yeah.
So if we are going to continue to train physicians in a system that is systemically racist, a system that is systemically making our students and trainees depressed, then you can come into this career, into this system with all the hope and desire to make a change in the world. But if you don't give folks the space to really thrive and be joyous because of this system, then you're gonna sap it out of them. And by the time they become that attending, they're gonna be so jaded and they're gonna be in this system of let me publish or perish. And that's why we need systemic change.
Yeah.
So it can't just be an individual imperative, it has to be a collective one.
So on that note, if you could wave a magic wand and completely remake medical education in the US, what would that look like?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think, one thing that I would hope to do is off the bat, I don't think that any student should be doing the work of medicine and healing without knowing their community. So I think that the first step of training would need to be meeting with community leaders, learning about where people go to eat, where they go to fellowship, where they go to feel safe, where they go to play, really learning about what the lives are of the folks that they're going to be serving, because that's going to directly influence how your patient is going to be able to take their insulin, how they're going to be able to manage their hypertension or their diabetes. If you're saying, hey, I need you to take this metformin, but at the same time, you don't even realize the access to healthy food or the access to safe spaces to exercise, then you're going to be unable to fully be the healer that you need to be for that patient. And I think that that's where a lot of us are failing, in that, we come to these communities and we work, but then we leave. We're not eating lunch in the community. We're not, going to the gym in the community. We're doing all of that elsewhere, and then we're coming in.
Yeah.
So I think that really learning about the systemic struggles of community members and learning that they really are the folks that we have so much to learn from as a way to become better healers. I think that that would be the first thing that I want to do. And I think that some schools have versions of it. I know we do that for like a day here at Harvard Medical School, but I think that that needs to be a longer immersion. And I think it needs to be a continuous immersion.
Yeah.
And I think that more and more really community leaders and activists and advocates should be our professors. And I think if we can move in that kind of a direction, that'd be awesome. And I think the second thing I do is making sure that conversations about disparities aren't these slides at the end of a 45-minute lecture and you spend 2 minutes on this slide saying, hey, yeah, so today we talked about diabetes. And as you can see, you have Black, Latinx, and Indigenous peoples who have disproportionate rates of diabetes. And we're doing everything we can to really address this. And it's really sad. And that's the end of the lecture, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the reality right now. And it's like, no, let's have an entire conversation about this. Let's discuss it in small groups. And it's okay. I think we always end on this question of like, what do we have to be hopeful about? And it's okay to not be hopeful about it, but to really do the work to make sure that we address the issue. Because right now, we aren't hopeful. And I think that that's okay. I think that there's always this like, nice bow that we want to put on difficult conversations, but no, what do we
Yeah.
need to do to get there? And I think that that's something that I like to change. And I think lastly, it would be the conversation that we just had where we think about incentivizing social justice. So how do we build a system where our medical students and our residents and even our attendings are really pushed to do the work of social justice in a genuine way, and they really are able to become that researcher, professor, and leader that they want to be without feeling like they have to sacrifice or lose something in their journey to get there.
Yeah.
So we can go on for days, but I think that really centering community and love, and allowing us to be whole people in our training is really what I would hope to create.
It actually sounds a lot like the public health curriculum. So I just, at
Mm,
age 37, finished my MPH, and about a third of my colleagues were practicing physicians well into their careers, who a
yeah,
lot of them told me that's really why they wanted to get their MPH, to be able to look
yeah.
more holistically at cases with their patients and understand the social determinants of health. And so it feels like perhaps there's some more public health curriculum that could be embedded into the medical school curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that public health schools have always been on it. I think that, that view, that
Yeah.
upstream understanding of medical problems is the way to go. And I think specifically with an anti-racist lens, I think that all these things we really have to consider, okay, what are the underpinnings of our country and what are ways that sociopolitical decisions, policies, and intentional things have led to these outcomes. And I think that that's where even public health schools can do better, right? Because a lot of times we talk about these are social determinants of health and these are kind of disparities, but really thinking about how these things aren't natural and they weren't just kind of created and just appeared magically, but really they were purposeful systems that have led to the things that we're seeing.
Yeah, throughout someone's entire life. I mean, the life
Yeah.
course perspective is really interesting. So, when did you know you were going to be a doctor? Is this something that very early on you knew, or high school?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was actually like 3rd grade. That's like
Wow.
the first time I remember like speaking the words like, "Yes, I'm gonna become a doctor." And I remember like my love for science really came through after I won the 3rd grade science fair at Ambler Elementary School in LA. And I like told my mom the day before that I had this science experiment to do for this fair. And she was like, "What?" So we went and we like Googled some projects and we ended up like looking at the behavior of fish and how they respond to darkness or something like that. And it ended up
That's fun.
winning. And yeah, it was really fun. It was cool. I was like, "Oh, this is neurology." I was like, "I'm going to become a neurosurgeon." And that's what I would tell people. I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to become a neurosurgeon." That was like my thing. And I'm still fascinated by the brain, but no longer want to be a surgeon. But I think that that moment was very much so emblematic of how my mom has always just supported me and guided me without question. She was like, "Okay, we're gonna
Yeah.
do it," and she really is, the engine behind me and everything that I've been able to accomplish. And I say that I'm so proud of her all the time because she's the
Oh,
reason why I'm even here. So I'm
yeah.
like, if you're proud of me, then you got to be proud of my mama because I wouldn't be here without her.
Yeah, I want to your white coat speech had me tearing up when
Oh,
you
I love
called her
that.
out. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
beautiful. So, have you ever had moments where you really were close to giving up and other than your mother or maybe only your mother, what really kept you going?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the most challenging moments of my journey to becoming a physician was really in undergraduate and the undergraduate portion when I was in college because being pre-med is a grind. I feel like at every step, like there's someone who's trying to weed you out. There's always someone who's telling you, oh, well, I don't know if this is right for you. I had so many different professors and people kind of tell me, like, are you sure this is the track for you? And I was a health and human sciences major at my school, and that's like where you learn a lot about public health and you learn a lot about like human anatomy, physiology, but it wasn't considered like a hard science major, like a biology or a biochemistry. So in that sense, I feel like there was a lot of, unspoken discouragement of folks from where I was coming from to go into medicine. And I think also just adjusting to the fact that, where I went to school, I didn't necessarily, take like AP physics. And I think that there were people who kind of came into college from different prep schools and they kind of had access to resources where it was easy for them to kind of just jump into it. But I think that I had a lot to kind of learn and get used to. And I definitely had moments where I was like, yo, is this the path for me? Is this really what I want to do? I really thought like, should I just do public health? Because I felt like, as I was learning in school, like that was more where my passions lie. But I was like, no, I really need to become a physician because I felt that that mindset that I had, that public health mindset, needed to infiltrate medicine because those are the folks who are having the direct day-to-day relationships and conversations with patients. So absolutely. I mean, I say it all the time. I mean, studying for the MCAT was brutal. I feel like that was the most sad I ever was. I just wake up and just study and just
Yeah.
look at this book all day. And I was like, oh my goodness. So that was rough. I got an F on like my first chemistry exam. But I'm still here, y'all. I got a B on my I got a B on my report card at one point, but still made it to Harvard Medical School. So this is all to say,
Yeah.
like, when you have this idea of like, what you have to do as a pre-medical student. You're like, I have to do these 1,000 hours of community service or, direct clinical care. That's another point I failed to bring up is that, there's these requirements that you have of getting exposure to medicine, right? And thinking about who has access to like that physician in their family who can give them those hours that they need. But it was really hard at
Yeah.
first to like find people that would let me shadow them. Like I would have to just like cold email people like, hey, would you let me join you in your office? And I didn't always get a response. I think a lot of folks don't get a response. And now being a medical student and seeing how busy my preceptors are, I'm like, I see why I wasn't getting a response, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that, and it goes back to the extra burden put on URN faculty and health providers because they feel this natural desire to want to serve and to help their community by allowing that student to shadow them. But it's like, it's hard to do that
Yeah.
for so many students. So all this to say like, it's a journey and it's a tough one. But I think that during the entire process, I always kept in mind the person I was becoming and the person that I wanted to be. And I never let the challenges get me down because number one, I knew why I was doing it. And I knew that I was raised by the strongest woman I've ever met in my life. And I knew how hard she was grinding, how hard she worked for me to be here. So how can I give up when my mom raised me as a single parent in Compton, California, and managed to get both her bachelor's and master's degree and continues to push herself every single day to be better and to
Wow.
strive greater for her
Yeah.
family. So I think I think really, she's my engine, but I think also my journey to get here wasn't smooth. It wasn't, just a straight
Hmm.
shot.
Yeah.
So when I encounter challenges in medical school, whatever it may be, a hard day, feeling like I'm incompetent because of whatever, just being a med student, you just push through and you get up and you just do it again because you know you're doing it for your community.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I hope that we have some future med students that are listening.
Yeah.
It's very cool to hear the truth about it, that it isn't always an easy path, but here you are and you're making a difference beyond just the work that you're doing at school. You also have a nonprofit that you started that you're running. I can't imagine how you have time for that on top of all the articles and using your platform for social justice. So, that's awesome. Can you tell us about We Got Us, your nonprofit?
Absolutely. So We Got Us was started because in December when the vaccines were first approved, I was getting a lot of messages from family members and friends asking about the vaccines. They were just like, "Look, what's up with this?" And I think, naturally being the first in your family to do this,
Yeah.
you really become like the doctor.
And wait, sorry, they were skeptical about should they get the vaccine or not?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
They were just wondering about it. I feel
Yeah.
like everybody was. They were just like, okay, it's like we were all waiting for the vaccine to come, but then when it
Yeah.
finally came, we were like, but wait, it's
Ooh,
here.
do I really want to be one of the early ones? Yeah.
Right,
Sure.
right, right, exactly. So naturally, a lot of my family and friends were coming to me asking me about it and if I felt like it was safe. And I was doing a lot of explaining about the science behind it, and as I was doing my own research. And at the same time that I was doing that work, there was a lot of reports coming out in the media about this idea of skepticism within the Black community about the vaccine. And they were really citing these historical instances of medical racism as a reason for that. So they were talking about the untreated syphilis experiment. They were talking about Henrietta Lacks. They were talking about, Betsy and Archa and the enslaved women that Marion Sims operated on and that experience. But they weren't really focusing on the day-to-day experiences of medical racism that my community faces. And they also weren't talking about access. They weren't talking about how once we got these vaccines, how are we going to make sure that communities have access to it, access to the education that they need to understand why this vaccine is safe, and physical access to the vaccine, access to physicians who look like them, who can explain information about it. And the other piece of it was related to that last point. There were studies that were also coming out showing that racial ethnic concordance between provider and patient led to increased seeking of information about the vaccine. So that means if you put a Black provider in front of a Black patient, that Black patient was more likely to want to get more information about the vaccine and to feel more comfortable in doing so because that physician looked like them.
Yeah.
And because of the paucity of physicians that we have in our country who are Black people, because of systemic racism and the challenges of entering the career and the Flexner report and so many other things, this is the situation that we were in. So I knew that there was a need for an organization that would, number one, have an understanding of medical racism in a historical sense, not just focusing on these events that happened years and decades ago, but really the way it presents today. And then also making sure that we connect providers who look like the patients and communities that they're trying to impact and give information to, and also increasing access to the vaccine by doing the door knocking and the canvassing that was necessary to get that information out there. So I literally, it was Christmas break. I'm like, Lash, you have no time to do this. Like, you're literally in your clinical year. You are a full medical student right now. But the more I thought about it, I literally sat on the idea for about a week or two. And I was like, if I don't do this, who's going to do it? And I was like, okay. So I just wrote this little proposal, started sending emails to folks, and stumbled upon a great support within the American Board of Internal Medicine. And he was like, okay, Lash, I'm going to give you $10,000 to start this. And I was like, okay. So I just went, I sent out a call for applications to different Black medical students and pre-medical students across the Massachusetts area, did an informational session, started interviewing folks for positions. And now, 6 months later, we're a coalition of over 100 students, have an executive team of 8 folks, and each of them are committed to various aspects of our organization. And what we do is we empower through education. We do these things called empowerment sessions, where we really spend about an hour with different community groups virtually talking about the history of medical racism, the way the vaccines work, and really answer any questions they have about the vaccines. And we tailor it to the needs of each group. So if you're interested in the vaccines in relation to, being a pregnant person, if you're worried about the vaccine and how it relates to youth, we also do youth empowerment sessions and have a team of high school students that works with us. And in addition to that, we're in the community, and we do canvassing, and we do various community events where, if you're out having a festival, we're going to be out there talking to folks about the vaccine and getting them vaccine appointments. And recently we started to do our own community events where we've had comedy shows and also have kind of combined the arts with also public health in that way. And it's been a phenomenal opportunity. It's really been everything that I want to do. I mean, I imagine myself being a 100% community-based physician and really, bridging this gap between the information and access to tools that we have. So it's been a major blessing, and I'm just really proud of how the organization is growing, and excited to see where we go in the future.
You've already impacted the lives of so many, and no doubt you'll continue to do so as you carry on your journey to become a doctor. My last question for you is how we can support your work.
I would say if you're interested in learning more about We Got Us, you should check us out at We Got Us Project. And that's on Facebook, that's on Twitter, and that's on Instagram. And we're regularly posting different videos. We have this awesome animated video that recently was released that really breaks down the vaccine and the disparities that we've seen. So if you're looking for something that is tangible that you can share with community groups and leaders, please check us out there on all our socials. And if you just want to donate or learn more about the organization and our origins, check us out at wegotusproject.org on our website. We have all that information there. If you're interested in volunteering, collaborating, we would love that. Just please hit us up there. And if you want to follow my work personally, you can read any and all of my articles at LaShyraNolen.com. I also rap as well, so you can check out some of the raps that I do there, and all the other panels and things like that I participate in. I'm on Instagram at Lash Nolen Official and on Twitter at Lash Nolen. So please follow me. I love to engage in conversation around all these topics of social justice. And I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really hope that this conversation can impact some hearts and lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lash.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Heart of Healthcare podcast. If you liked today's show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on social, and tell all your friends to listen. The Heart of Healthcare with Hallie Tecco is a product of Offscript Media. Our executive producers are Holly Tecco and Matthew Zachary. Our senior producers are Brianna Seeley and Andrew McDowell. It is mixed and edited by Brianna Seeley. Our music is by Utah. For advertising and media inquiries, email media@offscript.com. Hit us up at contact@offscript.com to share comments, feedback, and make recommendations. For more information, visit offscript.com. That's offscript, no T.com.